Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 11 of the Real Talk, the Pendulum. It's hosted by Dr. Serena. Welcome, everyone. Dr. Serena, the show is all yours.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Hi, Mai. Welcome. Hi, Lori. So welcome to today's podcast. I wanted to just make a shout out to, it is June. So there's lots of events that happen in June. It's Pride Month. It is Juneteenth month, and wanted to acknowledge that. And also it's PTSD Awareness Month. And this week, it's actually Global Loneliness Awareness Week, which I thought was interesting because, back in 2023, there was the Surgeon General had put out a study and declared it a national epidemic about loneliness. So I thought that would be an interesting topic to talk about. And also, I'm a little biased because our Surgeon General is East Indian. So, it was kind of like, oh, okay, let me talk about this. So, I thought it might be interesting to talk a little bit about, this kind of spectrum of loneliness and solitude. Oftentimes we may get the two confused. And, with mental health too, and even with substance use disorders, the two concepts can be quite confusing, and also it could be quite hard to differentiate between the two, depending on in the spaces where people are at. And I know for myself, and I've talked about this before, that I'm really, I enjoy my solitude, and I really have enjoyed spending time by myself and doing things. I've traveled alone, I've gone to other countries by myself, and I've always enjoyed those experiences. And then when the pandemic hit, it really threw me into the deepest abyss of loneliness I've ever experienced. And so that really also kind of brought to light some of my own experiences and questions about, what is the difference? What is going on here? And I did do some research on it and talk to a few people about it too. And I didn't realize that they actually had an awareness week about loneliness, because it appears that it's become more of a public health issue than we thought. And one of the things that was in the Surgeon General's report was, that younger people are experiencing it more. Part of it is also because of technology, that there is more of a disconnect that people experience because of technology, and older people experience it. And in the report, people that live alone and also, the working class may experience it more. This sense of loneliness. And there's a lot of research that indicate too that, with loneliness itself, and I'm just using the Surgeon General's report here, which is, accessible online as well. That loneliness itself, the sense of feeling disconnected. And I'm going to talk about Brene Brown's definition because I really liked it, and how we could understand this difference between solitude and loneliness is that, with loneliness, it really can increase people's sense of depression. It can increase, mental health issues. It can increase the use of substances. And culturally too, one of the things that can happen is that when people feel isolated or disconnected, if you think about individuals in different communities as well with Pride Month, the feeling of loneliness can also increase a lot of other kinds of behaviors too. So, kind of talking about this range of solitude and loneliness, I really like, I was listening to this podcast that's put on by Harvard, and I think it's called the Harvard Gazette. I referenced it at the end of this PowerPoint, and I really like how they talk about solitude, and so I included it here. And the definition, what they described is obviously from Brene Brown, and Brene Brown describes, she describes, loneliness as how we belong, or how we feel we belong with ourselves and with other people, that sense of belonging that we have. And so, when we don't feel like we belong, when we don't feel like we're worthy of belonging to a group or with ourselves or with other people, then it increases our chances of feeling lonely. or we feel disconnected, and solitude is, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this too, is that, solitude is more intentional with, really taking the space for ourselves, and we do it more out of a space of a desire to be with ourselves and reflect and whatnot. So I'm just kind of curious, maybe Lori or Mai, if either of you want to contribute, like your experiences with solitude and loneliness. I don't know if you've had experiences with both or struggled with them or want to share or are open to it, but I'm gonna open the floor up for a moment, or if anybody on Facebook has any questions so far about it.
Well, I can speak from personal experience. I know when I got divorced, after having been married for 33 years and never having any sense of loneliness because there were
Yeah,
always people around me, I was suddenly thrust. And, of course, it was intentional.
right.
However, I wasn't prepared for that sense of constant and consistent aloneness, I'll call it. And I think that kind of led to a feeling of loneliness. Even though I had friends around and things to do, it was just the day-to-day living by myself that I just wasn't really prepared for that. So,
Wow.
yeah, I had that, and now I'm enjoying, like you mentioned solitude, where I'm enjoying being alone. I still feel uncomfortable doing things alone. Like traveling alone, I'm not very comfortable doing yet.
Mhm.
But yeah, so that's just my personal story.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. And also kind of the experience of, sometimes people can feel lonely when they're alone and not feel lonely when they're alone too. So just kind of putting that in the mix too is really important. Maya, I didn't know if you wanted to share something. I saw you briefly make an appearance.
No, that was just me playing with the controls.
Oh, okay. You look great, by the way.
Thank you.
So yeah, so the idea with this is, recognizing how sometimes, I think Brene Brown's sense of, her research, she's done a lot of research and she's really big right now in terms of talking about vulnerability and, how sometimes that we in our society, we kind of shy away from being vulnerable, and that oftentimes can also increase our sense of disconnection and feeling alone and being lonely. And sometimes we need to, increase our ability to be vulnerable with other people. And that's not always an easy thing to do because, oftentimes we, we're human beings, we're afraid of being rejected or, not having people respond to us or, not wanting to be a burden on other people. And yet at the same time, we may have individuals that really want to support us too, but don't know how to do that. And sometimes just having honest conversations about what that looks like can be very important in terms of, what you need from other people and what that may look like from each other. And I think especially with young people, sometimes, we talked about this before, like individuals that are going off to college, there's always this kind of like, okay, I don't know how much to help and I don't want to help too much. And I know they need to be independent. And yet I don't, I'm not sure like where is that kind of happy medium, so to speak. And sometimes it's just being open about, what can I do? What is it you need me to do? And because I want to be supportive and yet I don't want to hover, so to speak. And being able to role model what that looks like sometimes. I mean, I know I often struggle sometimes with reaching out. I know I've been doing that more and more. I also know that, during the pandemic, and I've talked about this before, that, the loneliness, increased a lot of the drinking too. And so that was something that I realized and had to stop. And so one of the things that's really helped me has been reaching out to people more. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes here in terms of, how to manage the loneliness. But talking about solitude, recognizing that solitude is really kind of an act, and it is an action I think, that we do for ourselves, that it is more intentional. One thing I do want to describe too is that there's different levels to this. So in the podcast I had mentioned, and I kind of also subscribe to the same format and belief with this, is that there are different levels of this as well, with loneliness. And I think with solitude, we can have this as well, is that, solitude tends to be more of an independent, personal self person. But there are different ways that we can also kind of look at it in terms of the levels that exist of how we may feel lonely. And I think that's one way to kind of differentiate too, if we're feeling lonely, or are we doing this out of an act of solitude. But with solitude, here are some things that, to be mindful about in thinking about, solitude as a whole, is that really that solitude is more intentional. It's something that we're making by choice. Oftentimes, like, we may not purposely choose to isolate. I know, like, with the pandemic, that, sometimes that can look like, we're being driven to be solitude, in solitude. But, we're really isolating because it was really hard to connect to people. We weren't able to have physical contact with people because of the limitations of the pandemic itself. And so a lot of that increased, some fear and some anxiety that we had as a society, with what happened post-pandemic. And I think some of that carried through, with us today. So it's like we kind of lost a little bit of how to be around other people, or some people even recognize that they prefer more solitude. One of the things with solitude is that it is a choice. We're doing it because we recognize that it is about self-care. It's a way that some people replenish themselves. I know for myself, it's like, it helps me kind of recharge when I do things and have my own space and my own time. That's one of the reasons why I like to travel alone. I used to travel a lot, and I would go to different countries, and they would always be by myself. I would meet a lot of different people. I would do a lot of different things. I might meet up friends there or make new friends or whatever. But traveling, was one of my treasured solitude activities before the pandemic. And it was really a way to self-charge and have fun and be creative, and an opportunity to do things that I normally wouldn't do by myself. And solitude also allows us the space to be reflective. Some people like to, do activities when they're in their space by themselves. Sometimes people, when they're in their own space, they're not the kind of person that can just sit still, or, be still, or whatever you want to call it. So, some of the research indicates that meditation or journaling, or, doing something that's more reflective. It could be reading a book, or, researching a new hobby, or something that may spark some creativity or make some connections internally. But anything that's reflective, can be more of solitude. And in isolation, we're not necessarily reflective. When we're isolating from other people, we may ruminate more. And so we may be more prone to, think about more depressive thoughts, or more anxiety thoughts, or thoughts that really kind of spiral us into more depression, or negative spaces. And so that's also another difference between the two, is that, really kind of being mindful of what that looks like. And everyone's experience might be a little different. And so I think that's really important to be mindful about as well, is just recognizing, if you're questioning it, that's great. I mean, that's the first thing. I know for myself, when I am in this space, I do have to ask myself, okay, am I doing this because it's intentional, or am I really isolating? Like, what's going on here? Because I want to make sure that I'm not, getting to a space where I'm actually going to maybe trigger an anxiety episode, or, get into a depressive spiral or something of that nature. And that's a way that I have learned to take care of myself and keep, moving forward, to just taking it one day at a time kind of a thing. But really being mindful about, is this intentional, and is this in the space of being reflective and giving myself an opportunity to think about what's going on, or am I using this time to, have a pity party, or allow my negative thoughts to take over. And what the research has actually shown is that solitude allows people to regulate themselves. Like when people, you've heard of this, some people have heard of this. I know when I work with students, in the program, we talk about this with self-care, and I teach students these kinds of things too, because especially in the helping professions, being able to regulate their own emotions when they're working with clients is really important. And with clients that I've worked with as well, we talk about emotional regulation, and solitude is one of those things that can help regulate. A lot of the research actually indicates that, when we take time for ourselves, some research indicates that it helps to lower the intensity of an emotion. And some people may have had that experience themselves, like, when they're in for example, you're in an argument with somebody, and you may just say, hey, I just need to take 5 minutes to myself and kind of cool down. And you do that, you take some time, some space for yourself, and maybe do whatever you do. And some people deep breathe, some people talk to themselves or talk themselves down in their space so that they can be like, okay, I need to calm down. I'm okay. Everything's all right, whatever that may look like. But it allows a person to just regulate their emotions, and also just the space, their internal space that they're in. And that's really important to be able to do. And just an opportunity to do that too, because it's not always easy to do that in the presence of another person. I think other people's energies, and sometimes the way other people might be around us can also just get us going too. I mean, especially with certain characteristics. I know when I work with certain individuals that have different personality characteristics, I really need to be able to be in a space that I'm regulated, because sometimes it can be very overwhelming and draining to work with that. So recognizing that, okay, before and after a session, this is what I need to do, just kind of clear my space out a little bit. And solitude allows people to connect with themselves. Brene Brown talks about that, how we belong with ourselves, that sense of belonging and recognizing we're worthy, and that we deserve that too. And so I think solitude is also kind of an act of showing that to ourselves, that it's like a gift we give, that we're worthy of time to ourselves, where we are doing something that's of value in our own lives, whether it be journaling, or a hobby, or, going to a class, or, taking care of our own body, or our mind, or our spirit, whatever that may look like. But it's really kind of a way that allows us to know ourselves more deeply. And I think that's an important piece to it as well. With loneliness, here are some things that can be helpful. And this is where, in the podcast, and in some other research, they talk about that there are different types of loneliness that exist. And, I think that's important to recognize too, because a person can experience like one type of loneliness more than another, or they can experience all three, and that could be very overwhelming. Or they can experience, like a combination of stuff. And so recognizing it first, experiencing it, and the experience may be different. Like, for example, there's, the personal loneliness, like just feeling lonely, like from oneself, like not feeling connected psychologically. Like, is there someone that I can actually call and trust and connect with and, rely on, and not feel like I'm a burden to, that kind of thing. The loneliness from being excluded from like a group, Brene Brown talks about that with belonging. Do I feel like I belong to a community, or, a group, or a family, or, just a society, if you want to put it that way. And then, the larger kind of broader, they use the word collective or universal, which they described it as like kind of like an existential thing. So like having a purpose, or a mission, or, the values that you may have. Like sometimes, and I think they mentioned a study about how like some people like feel kind of disconnected and feel lonely, like they don't have a purpose. And so that's a larger scale kind of sense of loneliness, like things don't really matter. And sometimes that can increase the sense of loneliness, that a person experiences, because it doesn't feel like what I'm doing matters. And so there's a disconnect. It doesn't feel like it belongs anywhere. And so I think that's a really important specific type of loneliness to recognize if that is present, because there are specific ways to work with that, to work and to find some help and to find somebody that can help you work through that. And depending on the type of loneliness that's being experienced, I mean, the suggestions that are up here, probably work more with the first and the second one, with the self, psychologically and socially, but also like from a spiritual perspective, and I'm going to call it a spiritual loneliness, but really just kind of finding meaning and purpose, clarifying values, of course I'm biased, but, talking to a therapist, finding a counselor, someone who may understand those kinds of things. And or even going to, if there is a spiritual advisor that you prefer in the community, that could be someone that you talk to. I know several people that, prefer to go to individuals that practice different forms of healing, and that works too. So whatever is going to help the journey, that's what's important. And looking for resources. I mean, the internet obviously offers quite a few resources. But, recognizing, with loneliness, I think first it's recognizing, what does this mean? What does this look like to me when I'm feeling lonely? And acknowledging it. Loneliness is a human emotion. We all experience it. And, as I mentioned before, when I did during the pandemic, it freaked me out at first. And I was like, what the heck is this? And then it was like, I did not like it. And, as humans, when we don't like something, especially if we're not used to it, we will run. And I know I was like, I don't want to feel this, and that's obviously what led to more drinking too, of course. But, at the same time, it was like, once I understood what was going on and realize that connection, it was like, I got to kind of feel it. I have to feel it, because otherwise you're not going to get through it. And so when I did, and I allowed myself that space to do so, and recognize that, this is not something that is fun. Loneliness is not a fun feeling. And at the same time, yet it's a very human emotion. And I think that's part of the human experience, right? That's that pendulum, is that it is part of the human experience. And at the same time, it's kind of one of those situations that you go through this to get through that. That's the pendulum, you go back and forth. And so anyway, recognizing what it looks like, so now that I know kind of what that experience looks like for me, it's something that I can identify and I can manage and prevent it, because I recognize it and I realize what it was about and I see it. And so now, I mean, barring another pandemic, of course, there are things that I can do in order to manage that feeling, so that it doesn't lead to behaviors that are going to interfere with my life and allow me to have, different things. So then, recognizing it for yourself and then identifying, what level it may be on. Volunteering, can also be something that helps with loneliness too, being of service to other people. Finding different groups, that you can belong to, like Meetup or Facebook groups, and actually physically going out to the groups can be very helpful. That can also be very useful. Sometimes it's that physical connection, being physically present with other people that could be helpful. And, as, Lori mentioned, there is a difference between alone and loneliness. And, that could be explored perhaps in a, different session. But make a list of people to contact. I mean, this is something that I've done is I have a list, and I do connect with people, when time allows, and reach out to people when I can, and make sure that I stay connected with individuals. And making sure you reach out to the right people. This is the one thing that I liked about the Harvard podcast is that, you want to make sure you reach out to the people that are going to be receptive to you. Obviously not people that are going to be like, why are you contacting me kind of a thing. So reaching out to the right people is important. And another one too that I saw in some research I did was doing a random act of kindness. Altruism, they keep saying that, doing things for other people is like helpful. And there really is always a benefit to ourselves when we do things for other people. I mean, we feel good, especially when we are, when we feel like we're doing something that's beneficial for someone else. It helps us feel better. And there's a lot of research that indicates that as well. So those are the different things. That's the podcast that I was referencing, the Harvard one. I think it's a really great one. So I'll keep that up for a minute. I do hope that you take a listen to that as well. But I was curious if anybody has any questions in a couple of minutes that we have left or any comments that you want to make. We got about, I think, 2 minutes. Any thoughts?
Well, I took a lot of notes, so obviously it was a useful discussion. I appreciate it.
Oh, great. I'm very happy to hear that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a really big topic. And I don't think we talk about loneliness as much, or solitude for that matter.
No, we don't. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. And yeah, it is Global Loneliness Awareness Week. They do have a summit that's on tomorrow. So if you're interested in that, you can Google it and you will find there's a virtual and a physical location for tomorrow. So if you're interested in that, you can Google it. I think they're going to talk about, ways to increase connection and help people, decrease loneliness.
A very useful session. We did cross-post it on many pages, Dr. Serena.
Great.
So people are watching, and as you know, it's all ties in with mental health also. So, and I don't think so. You're right. We have ever spoken about solitude, difference between solitude and loneliness. A great session, very helpful.
Great, thank you. I'm glad it was helpful. All right. Well, if there's anybody that has any, topics that they're interested in, I'm always open to topics. Otherwise, we will be having guests coming in starting in July, I believe. So do be on the lookout for that.
Dr. Serena, do you also want to share that starting August, the date is going to be, the day is going to shift from Monday to Wednesday?
Yeah, so starting in August, we're going to be switching the podcast to Wednesdays at 7:30. So it would still be on the every 2-week schedule. But so the first one will be, I believe, August 7th or August 21st. I'm not sure yet about July 8th because I know that's right after the 4th of July holidays. So I'm going to see what's going on with that first, but it'll either be August 7th or August 21st, and we'll keep you updated.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Serena. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everyone.